For years, he had lived on the streets as one of London's many homeless. Now, as founder and director of The Big Issue, he's paved the way for thousands to find homes of their own, and in so doing earned himself an MBE. John Bird on his road to success in Make Your Mark. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you first started out.
Well, I was born in a kind of London Irish enclave or ghetto in Notting Hill, just after the Second World War. Lived in this very slummy part of London, the slummiest part of London at the time, and lived with a family that were not particularly good at handling their money, and certainly weren't very good at, you know, making sure we were fed and all that stuff. Homeless at 5 because they didn't pay the rent, and generally were born into crisis and stayed in crisis for many years, you know, quite a few decades. And consequently, I became, after an orphanage, I became a wrongdoer, housebreaking, shoplifting, and doing all sorts of things. So really, the adults around me produced me to be a ne'er-do-well. I was a product, you know, 50 years ago of what is still happening. And the greatest tragedy of my life is that I have not seen a reduction in that kind of poor circumstances disappear. I've just seen more of it. I've seen it move from the London Irish working class into the black working class, and into amongst people who are immigrants, in the same way as we were immigrants. It's just moved on, it's just changed colour. I think the biggest achievement was learning to read and write, which is ridiculous to say. But here I was in a boys' prison, I was nearly 16, and I couldn't, you know, a prison officer came in and said to me, I was locked in a cell by myself, and he said, what, do you want a book, boy? And I, you know, saluted and said, book, and he said, you can't read. And I said, well, I can read, I can read some words. And he said, I'll get you a book and I'll give you a pencil, underline the words you don't know. So over the next 3 or 4 months, he really taught me the confidence to read and write. I had, you know, I'd been stealing books since I was a kid, but I never could read them properly. That was one of the things. The other thing is, it's when you don't have to carry that kind of horrible load of rubbish that you get, which is poured into your mind around racism. Prejudice was the greatest intellectual development for me, which was the fact that I didn't have to believe what my mum and dad believed, that Jews and blacks and Indians and Arabs and all these people were low life. When I got rid of it and I realised that I could actually look at people as people, I felt my backbone kind of stretching. And in a way, I remember those two things. I was very fortunate because even though I was a wrongdoer, I was a Catholic, a devout Catholic. I took my Catholicism seriously. I went to church, and I always thought that there was out there some better world, whether it was Christ or whether it was the church and all sorts of things like that. I always aspired to something better, even though I kept getting into wrongdoing, you know, housebreaking and shoplifting and all that stuff, and I kept getting into more and more trouble. I was a devout Catholic, but I was also a devout shoplifter and a housebreaker, so I combined some very strange, an admixture of strange morality there.
You must have had lorry loads of guilt then. I mean, to be a Catholic and a shoplifter is a big combine.
Guilt, Catholic guilt, is largely a middle-class thing.
Oh, okay.
And I was a working-class guilt. So we didn't have any guilt. We just took. In the end, through the prison system, through the corrective system, I learnt certain skills. I learnt to look after myself. I learnt to read and write when I was in a boys' prison. So the prison system really helped in the way that it doesn't help now, because there are so many people going into the system that you cannot process them and you can't give them the opportunities that prison used to be able to give. So I was always a person who wanted to be different, and then got drawn into revolutionary politics where we wanted to destroy capitalism. So I was always looking for an answer to this crazy adult world. And I think it took me quite a few decades. When I was 21, I met this guy when I was on the run from the police living in Edinburgh, and he had become a multi-millionaire, had started the body shop with his wife Anita Roddick, and my mate Gordon and I started to work together on projects. He was in the United States, he was in Manhattan, in New York. This big black guy came towards him selling a paper. Gordon thought, well, this guy's not going to be nice to me. And he stuck out this paper and he said, would you like to buy a copy of my street paper? And Gordon said, how does it work? And he said, well, I buy it for 25 cents. I sell it to you for $1. I've just come out of the penitentiary. If I go back in again, I'm 54 and they'll throw the key away. So I've got out of Brownsville, where I come from, and I'm now living in Queens. I've got a room, and I'm out of homelessness, and I'm out of crime. And Gordon thought this was phenomenal, fantastic. Came back to the UK and got a feasibility study done by the body shop, which proved it wouldn't work, that a street paper in London wouldn't work. And then he came to me in 1991, just at the end of the Gulf War, and said, I want you to try this. And I thought, well, if we're going to do this, we've got to do it as an enterprise, as a business. And it's got to be done as a business which will give people opportunity and not simply make them feel good about their poverty. And that was the big difference. And that's why the big issue, in my opinion, still is one of the most revolutionary things that has happened in British society, and probably in other parts of the world that we've worked in.
John, to hear you in the year of the volunteer, anybody thinking of volunteering in the field of single homelessness is wasting their time.
Was the difference between begging and selling the big issue. A person who sells the big issue gets up in the morning, has to have the money, gets on the transport, goes to the office, signs in, buys the papers, comes back and has to smile all day, etc. It's more like a job. So what I would say the big issue is kind of unique in that it's given people the kind of opportunities that you and I get when we go to work, because we are socialised through our work. I think the biggest challenge for me is recognising the fact that society is run by people with some pretty bad thinking. I am particularly interested in my own kind of people. I'm sorry about that. A young mother I met the other day from Peckham, absolutely deserted by everybody in life. She has got 2 kids and she's making her way. We need to get the people who haven't got the opportunity, who haven't had the opportunity, who haven't had somebody behind them. And I say I'm like that. I'm a really good example of somebody who had nobody in his early life who really added up and made sense. I didn't have anybody. And I got out of it, and I think people like me need more help, because we can help a lot more. In 2001, people said to me, you know, you've done your 10 years, what are you going to do for the next 10 years? I said, well, I've been mending broken clocks for the last 10 years. I now want to find ways of preventing clocks breaking in the first instance.
A few years back, you got your MBE. How did that make you feel?
Didn't do an awful lot for me, but what was interesting was the effect it had on other people. About that time, we were trying to get an office in Brighton, and nobody wanted us to have an office. Then it went before the council, and somebody presented a letter. Well, here is a letter from Mr. John Bird, founder of the big issue, MBE. And it went, ooh! And it's so interesting that it does open doors. So sometimes you have to compromise. You have to be, you know, put yourself on the game a bit. I mean, I do anyway, in order to achieve things. So therefore you have to take recognitions. You know, I'm an honorary doctor. I would be no good if the plane was going down. I might be good at nosebleeds, but that's about it. And you get these titles and they open doors. And it's about trying to get people to take what you're doing seriously, and they need decorations. That's good. I mean, maybe one day I'll be Lord Bird of Fulham Broadway. Then I'll be able to just sign my name, John Broadway.